history is not always written to preserve memory. Sometimes it's written to erase it. And among the countless names swallowed by time, there is one king whose existence was deliberately buried. He wasn't forgotten because he failed, but because his very rule threatened the order of power itself. His name was once spoken in temples carved into stone and whispered with reverence across his land. Today, he survives only in fragments, broken inscriptions, defaced monuments, and the strange, echoing silences where praise should have been. This king reigned during a moment of profound transition. Old gods were fading, new powers were rising, and the very idea of authority was being rewritten. What made him so dangerous wasn't cruelty or conquest, but reform. He understood a fundamental truth: control over belief is far stronger than control over armies. He challenged priesthoods that had grown too powerful. He redistributed wealth that had been hoarded for generations by elites, and he reshaped the sacred rituals that define a people's identity. Quietly, methodically, he shifted the balance of power away from the institutions that had ruled for centuries. For a time, his reign brought stability, prosperity, and a strange kind of calm. But this was the kind of calm that deeply unnerves those who profit from chaos, and in that quiet, his enemies weren't preparing for a rebellion, they were preparing for his erasure. When the king died, there were no grand funerals recorded, no hymns preserved, no lineage proudly traced back to him. What followed was not succession, but a systematic, chilling removal from history. His name was chiseled away from temple walls with careful precision, not in a fit of rage, but with cold, silent intent. Statues were altered, their faces reshaped, titles were reassigned, and his greatest achievements were credited to others, as if history itself was being softly edited rather than violently destroyed. This process, which modern scholars call damnatio, memoriae, the condemnation of memory, wasn't just an act of revenge. It was a warning. It was a message sent across time to future rulers. Some ideas are simply too dangerous to survive remembrance. To remember this king would mean remembering that power could be challenged without war. It would mean remembering that belief systems could be reshaped peacefully, and that authority rooted only in tradition was never invincible. Centuries passed, and the absence became normal. Later generations walked past the empty spaces on monuments without ever knowing why they were empty. Scribes and chroniclers copied earlier texts, unknowingly repeating the omissions, perpetuating the silence, and over time the king became a ghost, present only in the negative space he left behind. It wasn't until much later that archaeologists began to uncover the clues. They found mismatched timelines, inscriptions that had clearly been altered, and stone blocks from his monuments reused in other buildings. They sensed that something was fundamentally wrong, that a narrative had been deliberately interrupted. The king's radical reforms, once attributed to him, were now credited to anonymous councils or vague, unnamed predecessors. His individual agency was dissolved into abstraction. This was the final, brutal victory of erasure, not just the removal of a man, but the removal of the very idea that one individual could change the system from within. What makes this forgotten king so unsettling is not how completely he vanished, but how intentionally it was all done. Erasure on this scale requires coordination, patience, and a consensus among the powerful. Those who benefited from his disappearance ensured that no songs were passed down, no portraits survived intact, and no loyal chronicler remained unpunished. They constructed a perfect silence, yet memory has a strange way of resisting. In the quietest places, traces always endure. They exist in unfinished carvings, in architectural anomalies, in radical new laws that appear suddenly in the historical record without any explanation. These remnants hint at a ruler, governed gently but decisively, whose authority was felt not through fear, but through profound change, and whose greatest threat was proving that even the most sacred traditions could be rewritten. Today, when we think of forgotten kings, we often imagine failure or obscurity. But this king was forgotten because he succeeded too well. His memory was dangerous, His legacy was destabilizing, and his example was contagious. To remember him would be to admit that history is curated, that silence is constructed, and that what we are taught is often the result of deliberate absence, not complete truth. And so, his name remains unspoken not because it was lost, but because it was removed. He leaves behind a question rather than an answer, a presence defined only by what is missing. He is a reminder that the most powerful stories are sometimes the ones we are never meant to hear spoken, now only in whispers carried softly across time, waiting for someone willing to listen. Thank you for watching. If you find these hidden histories as fascinating as I do, consider subscribing for more stories from the shadows.